My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto the familiar gravel driveway of Willow Creek Farm. The ancient oak trees stood like sentinels, their bare branches reaching toward a steel-gray November sky. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd made this drive, since I'd sworn I wouldn't return until something changed. And something certainly had. Just not in the way my family expected. Last night, I'd signed the final paperwork. Willow Creek Farm, the 180 acres of Pennsylvania farmland that had been in my family for 3 generations. The land my brother Jason had nearly destroyed with his arrogance and mismanagement, now belonged to me. As I parked behind my brother's mud-splattered pickup truck, I glimpsed my reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone was the uncertain girl who'd left this place with tears streaming down her face after being told her ideas for saving the farm were cute but impractical. In her place sat Rebecca Miller, CEO of Eastern Harvest Capital, rescuer of failing family farms across 3 states, and as of yesterday, the legal owner of my family's legacy. I checked my lipstick, smoothed my cashmere sweater, and whispered to myself, "They have no idea." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scent of roasting turkey and my mother's signature sage. Stuffing filled the farmhouse as I stepped through the front door, pumpkin pie balanced carefully in my hands. The house looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier too. The once pristine colonial farmhouse my grandfather had built now showed unmistakable signs of neglect. Water stains on the ceiling, peeling wallpaper in the foyer, a broken banister that no one had bothered to fix. "Rebecca, you actually came." My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour-covered hands on an apron that had seen better days. Linda Miller had aged since I'd seen her last, new lines around her eyes, more gray in her chestnut hair. The strain of the farm's financial problems had clearly taken a toll. "I said I would, Mom." I leaned in for a hug, careful not to crush the pie. She smelled the same, cinnamon and that specific laundry detergent she'd used my entire life. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, coming in from collecting eggs with cold fingers and red cheeks. The moment shattered when my brother's voice boomed from the living room. "Is that little Becca finally gracing us with her presence?" Jason appeared in the doorway, 6'2" and barrel-chested, looking every inch the farmer he considered himself to be. But I knew better. I'd seen the financial records, the missed loan payments, the second and third mortgages he'd taken out against the property to fund his ill-conceived expansions. The farm was weeks away from foreclosure because of his decisions. "It's Rebecca," I corrected him, setting down the pie. "Good to see you too, Jason." His wife Allison appeared behind him, their 2 children, Emma and Tyler, peeking around her legs. "Rebecca, you look different," she offered, eyes taking in my tailored slacks and designer boots. "City life agrees with her," came another voice as my sister Megan descended the stairs. "Though I'm surprised you could tear yourself away from your important business long enough to join us common folk for Thanksgiving." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. I'd anticipated this reception, the subtle digs, the condescension barely masked as teasing. It was the same dynamic that had driven me away 3 years ago. The baby sister who dared to get an MBA and suggest that perhaps traditional farming methods weren't enough anymore to keep a family operation afloat. "My schedule opened up," I replied simply, refusing to take the bait. Behind me, the door opened again as my boyfriend Chris arrived from parking his car. His presence was like a shield at my back. "You must be Chris," my mother said, brightening. "Rebecca mentioned she was bringing someone." Chris stepped forward, hand extended, 6 foot even with kind brown eyes and the confident posture of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for having me. I've heard so much about Willow Creek Farm." "All good things, I hope," my father said, appearing from his study. Tom Miller looked tired, more than tired, exhausted. His shoulders stooped under an invisible weight, and the firm handshake I remembered had weakened considerably. Dad. I moved to hug him and felt the slight tremor in his arms as he embraced me. "You look well, Rebecca," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Success suits you." Before I could respond, Jason interjected. "Speaking of success, Dad, I should show you the projections for the spring planting. I've got some ideas that could really turn things around." I bit my tongue. There would be no spring planting, not under his management anyway. The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings. The only reason the sheriff hadn't posted notices was the holiday week. My mother ushered everyone toward the dining room, where the table was set with her best china, the pieces only used for holidays and special occasions. "Dinner's almost ready. Jason, would you open the wine? Megan, the rolls need to come out of the oven." The familiar choreography of a family gathering began, with everyone falling into their assigned roles. Jason as the authoritative eldest son, Megan as the efficient daughter-in-law, my parents as the hosts trying to maintain the illusion that everything was normal, and me, traditionally relegated to simple tasks as the baby of the family despite being 32 years old. "Rebecca, would you fill the water glasses?" my mother asked, handing me a pitcher. Some things never changed. I caught Chris's eye as he helped bring serving dishes to the table, and he gave me a subtle, supportive nod. He knew everything about my history here, about the farm's precarious financial state, and about the documents I'd signed yesterday. He understood exactly why this day mattered. As family members and a few neighbors filtered in and took their places, I noticed Jason, counting chairs and frowning slightly. With Chris, we had one more adult than usual. Jason made a show of thinking through the problem before his face brightened with what I recognized as false concern. "Looks like we're one chair short at the main table," he announced. "Rebecca, you wouldn't mind sitting at the kids' table with Emma and Tyler, would you? Since you're the youngest?" The kids' table was a small card table set up in the corner, adorned with paper pilgrim decorations and plastic cups. Emma, age 7, and Tyler, age 9, were already seated there, coloring on their paper placemats. Chris started to object. "I can take that spot." "It's fine," I interrupted smoothly. "I'd be happy to sit with my niece and nephew." Jason looked momentarily disappointed by my lack of reaction before taking his seat at the head of the main table, a position our father had occupied for as long as I could remember. Another small sign of how dynamics had shifted during my absence. "Uncle Jason said you live in a fancy apartment now," Tyler said as I settled into the small folding chair beside him. "I do," I confirmed, helping Emma arrange her napkin in her lap. "In Pittsburgh, I have a great view of the river." "Do you have a swimming pool?" Emma asked, eyes wide. "The building does, and a gym and a rooftop garden." Tyler looked impressed. "Mom says you have a job with computers or something." I smiled. "Not exactly. I run a company that helps farms like this one." "Is our farm sick?" Emma asked with the directness only children can manage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question hung in the air between us. How to explain to a 7-year-old that her father had driven the family legacy to the brink of bankruptcy? "All farms go through challenging times," I said carefully. "But that's why people like me exist, to help find solutions." At the main table, conversation flowed around holiday-safe topics. The unseasonably cold weather, a neighbor's new barn, the high school football team's championship prospects. I half-listened while helping Emma cut her turkey and making sure Tyler didn't spill his cider. It was oddly peaceful at the kids' table, away from the undercurrents of tension among the adults. Eventually, the conversation at the main table turned toward business. I straightened in my seat, alert now. "We've got some promising developments in the works," Jason was saying, gesturing with his fork. I've been talking with some potential investors about expanding the dairy operation. This was news to me. According to the farm's financial records, which I'd reviewed thoroughly before making my move, the dairy operation was already operating at a loss, and the equipment was outdated and inefficient. "What kind of expansion?" my father asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "Modern milking facilities, maybe even a processing plant on site," Jason replied confidently. "Farm to table is all the rage these days. We could bottle our own milk, make artisan cheese. Consumers will pay premium prices for that authentic farm experience." From my seat at the kids' table, I could see my father's shoulders tense. He knew, as I did, that such an expansion would require capital they didn't have and couldn't get. The bank had already refused 3 loan extensions. "That sounds ambitious," my father said carefully. "I've actually been looking into agricultural diversification," I offered, unable to stay silent. "There are some interesting models combining traditional dairy with sustainable practices that significantly reduce overhead while increasing profit margins." The table went quiet. Jason's face darkened. "No offense, Rebecca, but running a spreadsheet in an office is a bit different from actually working the land." "Of course," I said agreeably. "That's why successful agricultural operations need both practical experience and solid business strategy." "Rebecca works with farms all over Pennsylvania and Ohio," Chris added from his seat at the main table. "Her company has quite a track record of turning struggling operations around." "Company?" my father asked, looking directly at me with new interest. "I thought you worked for an investment firm." I shook my head. "I founded Eastern Harvest Capital 3 years ago. We specialize in revitalizing family farms through modernization and sustainable practices." Another silence fell over the table. "Eastern Harvest?" My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "The group that took over the Wilson property last year?" I nodded. "Among others." "That place was failing," Jason said dismissively. "Old man Wilson couldn't manage a vegetable garden, let alone a working farm. And now it's one of the most productive organic dairy operations in the county," I countered. "The Wilsons still live there and work the land, just with better systems, equipment, and financial management." I could see the wheels turning in my father's head. The Wilson farm had been similar to ours, family-owned for generations, struggling to adapt to changing markets, drowning in debt. Now it was thriving under new management, my management. Jason must have seen it too, because he quickly changed the subject. "Pass the gravy, would you, Allison? Megan, didn't you say something about dessert?" The conversation shifted, but I had planted the seed. I caught my father watching me thoughtfully throughout the rest of the meal, reassessing the daughter he'd allowed to be sidelined for years. After dinner, while others congregated in the living room for football and conversation, I slipped away, to my father's study. The room had always been his sanctuary, walls lined with agricultural journals, soil samples, and farm records meticulously maintained since my grandfather's time. Now those records sat neglected, buried under piles of unopened mail. I recognized the red final notice stamps visible through several envelope windows. The desk calendar was open to September, though it was late November, another sign of how things were unraveling. I was studying the wall map of the property when I heard the door open behind me. "You shouldn't be in here," my father said, though there was no anger in his voice, only resignation. I turned to face him. "How bad is it, Dad?" He closed the door before answering, his voice lowered, though no one could hear us over the football game blaring in the living room. "Worse than anyone knows. The bank's foreclosing after the holidays. We'll lose everything." "Jason's expansion plans?" He sighed heavily, lowering himself into his desk chair. "Pipe dreams. We've been denied every loan application for the past 18 months. Jason keeps insisting something will turn up, but He gestured helplessly at the pile of notices. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked quietly. "I could have helped." "Your brother was adamant that we could handle it ourselves. Said it would be humiliating to go begging to his little sister." He looked up at me, his eyes full of regret. "Pride. Too much pride. My father warned me it would be the death of this place one day." I moved to perch on the edge of the desk, like I used to do as a child when he would explain crop rotations or livestock breeding records. "Tell me everything, Dad. All of it." For the next 30 minutes, he outlined the farm's decline, Jason's ill-advised purchase of the neighboring Henderson property before securing proper financing, the investment in specialized equipment that now sat idle because no one knew how to operate it properly, the failed organic hemp venture that had consumed their cash reserves. "We'll lose it all. The house, the land, everything," he concluded. "Your mother doesn't know how serious it is." I couldn't bear to tell her. I took a deep breath. "What if I told you the farm wasn't going to be foreclosed on?" He looked up, sharply. "What do you mean?" "What if I told you that Eastern Harvest Capital has purchased the outstanding debt on Willow Creek Farm? That as of yesterday, I hold the deed to this property?" His face went pale. "You bought our debt?" "How? Why?" "The how is simple. I negotiated with Davis Financial. They were happy to settle for 60 cents on the dollar to get a non-performing loan off their books before year-end." I reached for his hand, feeling the calluses that decades of farm work had built. "The why is more complicated, because despite everything, this is still our family's legacy. Because I couldn't bear to see it sold off for development. Because I believe it can be saved with proper management." "You own the farm now," he said slowly, processing this revelation. "All of it?" "All of it," I confirmed. "The paperwork was finalized yesterday." "And what happens to us? To your mother and me? To Jason's family?" "This is still your home," I assured him. "That doesn't change. What changes is how the farm is managed moving forward. Eastern Harvest will install professional management, modernize operations, implement sustainable practices. We'll make it profitable again, like we've done with 11 other family farms that were on the brink of failure." "And Jason? He won't accept this easily." "Jason has two options," I said firmly. "He can stay and work under the new management structure, learning modern agricultural methods and business practices, or he can accept the severance package I'm prepared to offer and start fresh elsewhere. Either way, the farm and the family's legacy will survive." My father was quiet for a long moment, staring at the framed photo of his own father that had watched over this office for decades. "I should have listened to you 3 years ago," he finally said, "when you first came to me with your ideas for modernizing the operation." "We can't change the past," I replied, surprised by how little vindication I felt. This wasn't about proving I had been right. It was about preserving something precious before it was lost forever. But we can shape the future, starting tomorrow. The door suddenly opened, and Jason stood there, his expression darkening as he took in our private conversation. "What's going on in here?" "Rebecca and I were discussing the farm situation," my father said, straightening in his chair. "Financial discussions without the farm manager present?" Jason asked sarcastically. "What's next? Board meetings without the CEO?" "That's actually not far off," I said calmly, standing to face my brother directly. "We should talk, Jason, all of us as a family, but not today. Today is Thanksgiving." "What's that supposed to mean?" His face had flushed red, the same shade it turned when he was a teenager caught in a lie. "It means tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything. Tonight, let's just enjoy being together." "Always mysterious, aren't you, Becca?" he sneered, retreating to his childhood nickname for me. "Swooping in from Pittsburgh with your fancy clothes and big city attitudes. Some of us have been here every day, doing the real work while you play businesswoman. "That's enough," my father said with unexpected firmness. "Your sister deserves respect, Jason, more than you know." The strange authority in our father's voice momentarily silenced Jason. He glared at me before turning on his heel and stalking out of the office. My father sighed heavily. That went about as well as expected. "Tomorrow will be harder," I warned him. "Yes," he agreed. "But maybe it's time for things to be hard for a while, before they can get better." I left him to collect himself and rejoined the gathering in the living room. Chris caught my eye from across the space and raised an eyebrow in silent question. I gave him a small nod. The conversation with my father had gone as planned. Throughout the evening, I observed my family through new eyes. My mother, still beautiful in her late 60s, laughing with neighbors but with tension around her eyes. Megan, efficiently managing the dessert service while keeping one eye on her children. Jason drinking more than usual, his forced joviality barely masking his panic over the farm situation. And through it all, I sat at the children's table for dessert, still the little sister, still underestimated, still dismissed, while holding the future of Willow Creek Farm in my hands. As guests departed and family members dispersed to various bedrooms, I found myself on the front porch, wrapped in my grandfather's old wool blanket against the November chill. The moon illuminated the fields that stretched toward the distant tree line, fields that had sustained my family for generations and now belonged to me. The screen door creaked, and Chris joined me on the porch swing, his warm presence comforting in the cold night. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "It's strange," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel more, I don't know, triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just feel responsible." He nodded, understanding. The weight of 3 generations, that's a lot to carry. "I'm not sure I fully appreciated what I was taking on," I confessed. In the office, reviewing financial projections and transformation plans, it all seemed clear-cut. But being here, seeing how deeply rooted everyone is in this place, even as it's failing, I trailed off, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. Having second thoughts? I shook my head firmly. No, this was the right decision, the only way to save the farm. But tomorrow's family meeting won't be easy. "You never expected it would be," he reminded me. "But you're not that intimidated little sister anymore, Rebecca. You're the woman who built a successful company from nothing, who's saved 11 family farms from extinction, who had the courage to come back and fight for her heritage when walking away would have been easier." His faith in me had been unwavering since we'd met 2 years ago at an agricultural sustainability conference. He'd been impressed not by my company's success, but by my passion for preserving family farming traditions while embracing necessary innovation. "I just hope that someday they'll understand that this wasn't about power or revenge," I said softly. "It was about preservation." "They will," he assured me. "Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, when they see the farm thriving again, when they realize what you've saved." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently on the porch swing my grandfather had built decades ago. From inside came the muffled sounds of my mother in the kitchen, my father's voice responding. The farmhouse that had always been home, regardless of how far I'd traveled or how long I'd stayed away. "Tomorrow," I said finally, "everything changes." "For the better," Chris added. "For the better," I agreed. Morning arrived with frost coating the fields and a sense of nervous anticipation in my stomach. I dressed carefully in what Chris teasingly called my CEO uniform, a charcoal gray blazer over a silk blouse, tailored trousers, and the pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Professional but not intimidating, authoritative but still approachable. By 8 o'clock, the family had gathered in the living room at my request. My mother looked confused. My father resigned. Jason was clearly nursing a hangover, his expression thunderous. Megan sat primly on the edge of the sofa, her posture defensive before I'd even spoken. "Thank you all for meeting like this," I began, standing before them with the Eastern Harvest portfolio in my hands. "What I'm about to share will come as a shock to most of you, but I want to assure you that my intentions are entirely focused on preserving our family's legacy." "What is this, Rebecca?" my mother asked. "You're scaring me." I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, Jason, Megan, Willow Creek Farm is in serious financial trouble, more serious than some of you may realize. The bank began foreclosure proceedings 3 weeks ago, with a sheriff's sale scheduled for January 15th. "That's not public information," Jason snapped, glaring at our father. "Who told her?" "It's my job to know," I replied calmly. "Agricultural finance, remember? But that's not why we're here. We're here because I've taken steps to save the farm." "What kind of steps?" Megan asked suspiciously. "As of Wednesday, Eastern Harvest Capital has purchased all outstanding debt on Willow Creek Farm. The foreclosure has been halted. The farm is no longer in immediate financial danger." A moment of stunned silence followed. "You bought our debt?" Jason finally sputtered, half rising from his chair. "Without consulting any of us?" "There wasn't time," I explained, "and based on past experience, consultation doesn't work well in this family. 3 years ago, I tried to discuss modernizing the farm's operations, implementing sustainable practices, diversifying income streams. I was dismissed as naive, impractical, too young to understand real farming. So this is revenge, Megan said flatly. "Make us all beg little Rebecca for our allowance now." "This is preservation," I corrected her firmly. "The farm was weeks away from being lost completely. Now it has a future. A sustainable, profitable future." "As your property," Jason spat. "As a professionally managed agricultural operation. That will remain in the family," I countered. "The house stays in the family. The land stays in the family. The legacy continues. That's what matters, isn't it?" My mother had gone pale. "I don't understand. Are you saying you own the farm now?" I nodded gently. "Yes, Mom. I own Willow Creek Farm, all of it. But that doesn't mean you lose your home. It means the farm gets the investment and professional management it needs to survive in today's agricultural economy." "And what happens to me?" Jason demanded. "The actual farmer in the family?" I opened the portfolio and removed the documents I'd prepared. "You have options, Jason. Option 1, stay and work with the new management team, learning modern agricultural methods and business practices. Your salary would actually increase, though your role would change. Option 2, accept this severance package and start fresh elsewhere, with enough capital to establish yourself in a new venture if you choose." I placed the papers on the coffee table. Jason stared at them as if they might bite him. "This is insane," he finally said. "You can't just waltz in here after 3 years away and take over." "I didn't just waltz in," I corrected him. "I built a successful agricultural investment company specifically designed to save failing family farms. I tracked Willow Creek's declining financial situation. I negotiated with your creditors when foreclosure became imminent. I developed a comprehensive revitalization plan tailored to this specific property. And yesterday, I completed the legal acquisition of all outstanding debt, securing the farm's immediate future." My father cleared his throat. "Your sister has done what none of the rest of us could, Jason. She's saved the farm when it was beyond saving. By taking it from us," Jason shouted. "By taking it from the bank that was about to auction it to the highest bidder," I countered, keeping my voice measured. "Would you prefer I had done nothing? Let developers carve it into quarter-acre lots for suburban homes? Watch 3 generations of Miller family history disappear because of pride?" The room fell silent again. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. Megan stared at her folded hands. Jason looked like he might explode. "Look," I said, softening my tone. "I understand this is a shock, a painful one. But the reality is that Willow Creek Farm needed intervention to survive. The methods and management approaches that worked for Grandpa aren't sufficient in today's agricultural economy. Eastern Harvest has a proven model for revitalizing operations like this one, modernizing infrastructure, implementing sustainable practices, developing diversified revenue streams while honoring the unique character and history of each property. I removed more documents from my portfolio: photographs, financial projections, testimonials from other families whose farms we'd rescued. This isn't a corporate takeover, I continued. It's a family preservation project. The Miller name stays. The Miller legacy continues. The difference is that now the farm will be profitable, sustainable, and secure for future generations. My mother reached for the materials with trembling hands. You've really saved 11 other farms like this? Yes, I confirmed. From Pennsylvania to Ohio to New York. Family operations just like ours that were drowning in debt and facing extinction. Now they're thriving, with the original families still living on and working the land, just with better systems and support. And what about the day-to-day operations here? My father asked. Who makes those decisions? Professional management, in consultation with Eastern Harvest agricultural specialists, I explained. We'll bring in experts in sustainable dairy practices, modernize the equipment, implement water conservation systems, explore complementary crops for the eastern fields, and develop agritourism opportunities appropriate to the property's character and history. Agritourism? Jason scoffed. You want to turn us into some petting zoo for city people? I want to create multiple revenue streams so the farm isn't vulnerable to market fluctuations in a single crop or product, I corrected him. Seasonal events, educational programs, farm-to-table experiences, all carefully designed to complement, rather than disrupt core agricultural operations. I could see my father processing this with growing interest. He'd always been more progressive than Jason, more open to new ideas, just too conflict-averse to overrule his dominant eldest son. The projections indicate we could reach profitability within 18 months, I continued, directing my comments to my father now. With full debt retirement possible within 5 years. After that, profit-sharing mechanisms would be implemented for family members actively involved in the operation. And if we refuse? Jason challenged. If we fight this legally? I met his gaze directly. You're welcome to consult an attorney, but the acquisition is completely legal and properly documented. More importantly, what would fighting accomplish, Jason? The farm was failing under your management. That's not an accusation, it's a documented fact. Without intervention, it would be lost entirely within weeks. I'm offering a path forward that preserves the property, the heritage, and provides options for everyone's future. The truth of this hung in the air between us. For all his bluster, Jason knew how precarious the farm's position had been. He'd been the one hiding bank notices, making excuses, pursuing increasingly desperate schemes to generate cash. I need time to think, he finally said, standing abruptly. This is too much to process at once. Of course, I agreed. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here until Sunday and available by phone after that. The management transition won't begin until after the holidays, so there's time to adjust to the new reality. As Jason stalked out of the room, followed quickly by a tearful Megan, I turned to my parents. I know this is overwhelming, but I promise you, my only goal is to save what Grandpa built, what you've dedicated your lives to preserving. My mother reached for my hand. You were always the one who listened most carefully to your grandfather's stories, who asked the most questions about the farm's history, the land, the cycles of planting and harvest. She has his eyes, my father added softly, and his determination. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift slightly. My parents, at least, were beginning to understand. Later that afternoon, as Chris and I prepared to leave, my father walked us to our car. The November sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields that stretched toward the horizon. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply. "Not just of what you've accomplished with your company, but of your courage in coming back to save this place when it would have been easier to let it go." "I couldn't let it go," I admitted. "Despite everything, this land is part of who I am." He nodded, understanding. "Next Thanksgiving," he said with the ghost of a smile, "there will be a place for you at the main table, a permanent place. With modernized crop rotation plans and sustainability proposals for discussion," I suggested lightly. "With whatever you want to bring to the table," he agreed. It's time the family started listening to the smartest miller of this generation. As we drove away from Willow Creek Farm, I watched the farmhouse recede in the rearview mirror, the place that had shaped me, that I had now shaped in return. The little girl they had seated at the kids' table was now the woman who would guide the family farm into a sustainable future. Sometimes the most powerful position isn't at the head of the table. It's holding the deed to everything the table stands upon. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned cold and clear, frost silvering the fields of Willow Creek Farm like a blanket of diamonds. I stood at the window of my childhood bedroom, cup of coffee warming my hands, watching the sun rise over land that had belonged to my family for generations, land that now, legally, belonged to me. Last night's revelations to my father had been just the first step. Today would bring the full family meeting, where everyone would learn what I'd done and why. My stomach tightened at the thought. Saving the farm had been the logical decision, the necessary one. But families rarely operated on logic alone. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Chris entered, already dressed in jeans and a sweater, his expression concerned. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, turning from the window. "Jason's car is already gone. Dad says he left before dawn." "Running away or regrouping?" "Regrouping, I'd guess. Jason doesn't run from confrontation. He's more likely gathering ammunition." I set my coffee down and straightened the collar of my blouse. "He's probably calling every banker and lawyer he knows, trying to find a way to undo what I've done." "There isn't one," Chris reminded me gently. "The acquisition is airtight. Davis Financial was eager to offload a bad loan, and Eastern Harvest made them a solid offer. Everything was done by the book." I nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. In the 2 years since we'd met at that agricultural sustainability conference in Chicago, me presenting on financial models for family farm preservation, him showcasing innovative irrigation systems, Chris had become not just my partner, but my most steadfast ally. He understood what was at stake here, both professionally and personally. "I should check in with Marcus," I said, reaching for my phone. "The Continental merger paperwork still needs my signature." Chris touched my arm, stopping me. "It can wait a few hours. Today needs to be about family first, business second. Remember why you're doing this." He was right, of course. The farm's rescue wasn't just another acquisition for Eastern Harvest's portfolio. It was personal, deeply, painfully personal. This wasn't about expanding my company's holdings. It was about preserving my grandfather's legacy, about ensuring that the land he'd worked would continue to sustain generations of millers. Downstairs, the farmhouse was unnaturally quiet. No radio playing in the kitchen, no coffee maker gurgling, none of the usual morning sounds. I found my mother sitting alone at the dining room table, staring at a photo album open before her. "Mom," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I couldn't sleep, so I got these out." She gestured to the album. "Your grandfather's records of the farm, year by year, crop by crop, all meticulously documented." I sat beside her, recognizing the familiar handwriting that filled the margins of each page. My grandfather's precise script recording rainfall amounts, yield calculations, equipment purchases. More than accounting, These volumes told the story of a family's relationship with the land. "He was so proud when you started showing interest in the farm management side of things," my mother said, surprising me. "Remember how he used to take you with him to auction days and equipment sales? He told everyone who would listen that his granddaughter had a natural head for the business." "I didn't know that," I admitted, genuinely touched. Grandpa had always encouraged my curiosity, answering endless questions about crop rotation and soil composition, but I hadn't realized he'd spoken of me to others. "Your father and I should have listened more when you tried to warn us 3 years ago." She closed the album carefully. "We let Jason take control because he was the oldest, because he was here every day, because it was easier than challenging, the way things had always been done. That was our mistake." The admission stunned me. In all my planning, all my strategic thinking about saving the farm, I hadn't anticipated this, my mother acknowledging that I'd been right all along. "It's not too late," I said, covering her hand with mine. "That's the whole point of what I've done. The farm can still thrive, still support the family, still be the place we all love. It just needs proper management and investment." "Jason won't see it that way," she warned. "To him, this will feel like you've stolen his birthright." "I didn't steal anything," I replied, more sharply than intended. "I saved what he was losing through mismanagement and pride." Before she could respond, the back door slammed open. Heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen, and Jason appeared in the dining room doorway. His face was flushed, eyes bloodshot. Whether from lack of sleep or morning drinking, I couldn't tell. "Well, if it isn't our savior," he said, voice dripping. With sarcasm, "Up early planning how to remake the family farm in your corporate image?" "Jason," my mother began, a note of warning in her voice. He ignored her, focusing his anger entirely on me. "I've been on the phone with Ben Walker at First Regional Bank. He says what you've done is technically legal but ethically questionable. Swooping in to buy distressed property without disclosing your relationship to the owners." I stood slowly, maintaining calm despite the accusation. "Every acquisition Eastern Harvest makes is fully transparent and legally documented. Davis Financial was well aware of my connection to Willow Creek Farm. It was disclosed in the first paragraph of our offer letter. They accepted because it made financial sense for their institution and provided a solution to a non-performing loan. You could have just helped us get financing," he countered. "If you're so successful, so connected, you could have arranged a new loan, a payment extension. Instead, you decided to take ownership, to control everything like you've always wanted." The unfairness of this stung. "I tried to help 3 years ago, Jason. I came to you and Dad with a detailed proposal for modernizing operations, securing sustainable financing. You laughed me out of the room, called my ideas cute but impractical. Remember? Traditional farming methods built this place, not spreadsheets and investor presentations. Traditional farming methods are exactly why this place is failing," I replied evenly. "The world has changed. Markets have changed. Climate patterns have changed. Successful agricultural operations adapt to those changes instead of pretending they don't exist." My mother stood, placing herself physically between us. "That's enough, both of you. This isn't helping anything." Jason's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his anger. "Where's Dad?" he finally asked. "Checking the north pasture fence. Some posts came loose in last week's storm." My mother's hand rested lightly on my arm, a silent plea for restraint. "He'll be back soon. We need to have a family meeting, a real one, without accusations or shouting." "What's there to meet about?" Jason demanded. "According to Rebecca, she owns everything now. The house, the barns, the equipment, the fields, all of it. What's left to discuss?" "How we move forward," I said firmly. "How we preserve what matters while changing what needs to change. How we save this farm and the family legacy it represents." He made a dismissive sound. Save it for your next corporate presentation. I'm not interested in your consultant speak." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "The farm lost money for 8 consecutive quarters under your management, Jason. Operating expenses exceeded revenue by 32% last year alone. Equipment maintenance was deferred to the point of creating safety hazards. Livestock breeding cycles were mismanaged, reducing herd quality. The Henderson property acquisition drained capital reserves without generating offsetting income. These aren't opinions or theories. They're documented facts from the farm's own financial records." He froze in the doorway, back rigid. For a moment, I thought he might simply walk out. Instead, he turned back slowly, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculated. "You know what? Fine. Let's have this family meeting. Let's get everything out in the open. Because there are some things you don't know, Rebecca. Some realities about running a working farm that don't show up in your spreadsheets and financial projections." With that cryptic statement, he stalked out, leaving my mother and me in uncomfortable silence. "What did he mean by that?" I asked. "Her." She shook her head. "I'm not sure. But Jason's always been one to fight hardest when he's cornered." She touched my arm gently. "Be careful, Rebecca. There's more at stake here than just the farm." The warning lingered as I helped her prepare breakfast, neither of us mentioning the confrontation. Chris joined us, bringing a welcome buffer of casual conversation. He had a gift for diffusing tension, sharing stories about his latest irrigation project in Western Ohio while helping slice fruit and set the table. By mid-morning, the family had gathered in the living room. My father sat in his usual armchair, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. Megan perched on the sofa, with her husband Ken, both watching me warily. Jason stood by the fireplace, arms crossed defensively. Only my mother moved about, offering coffee and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. Chris had positioned himself slightly behind my chair, a silent presence of support as I prepared to formally present Eastern Harvest's plans for revitalizing Willow Creek Farm. "Thank you all for coming," I began, placing my portfolio on the coffee table. "I know yesterday's news came as a shock, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to explain more fully what—" "Before you launch into your corporate takeover speech," Jason interrupted, "there's something the family needs to know." He looked pointedly at our father. "Something Dad and I have been working on independently." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Jason, I'm not sure this is the right time. If not now, when? After Rebecca's company has dismantled everything we've built?" He turned back to the group. 3 months ago, Dad and I began discussions with Heartland Agricultural Cooperative about a potential partnership. They've expressed interest in acquiring a minority stake in Willow Creek Farm to expand their organic dairy processing capacity. This was news to me. I glanced at my father, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "Heartland has preliminary approval from their board for a $1.2 million investment," Jason continued. "Enough to clear our most pressing debts and fund infrastructure improvements. We were in the final stages of due diligence when Rebecca made her move." The revelation hung in the air. If true, it would mean there had been another option beyond my intervention, one that would have maintained family control while providing needed capital. "Is this accurate?" I asked my father directly. "Was there a legitimate offer from Heartland?" He rubbed his hand across his face. "There were discussions," he conceded, "but nothing formalized. No term sheet, no binding commitments." "They were ready to move forward," Jason insisted. "Ben Walker at First Regional was prepared to extend our loans based on Heartland's interest. We just needed a few more weeks." I digested this information carefully. Heartland has been acquiring distressed farms across the Midwest for the past 3 years, I noted. In every case, they've installed their own management teams and transitioned operations to suit their processing priorities, regardless of the farm's history or the family's preferences. That's not true, Jason objected. They've committed to maintaining Willow Creek's unique character. It's not about character, Jason. It's about control. Heartland's business model is vertical integration. They want to control every step, from production to processing to distribution. Once they have a foothold, they inevitably push for greater ownership until the original family has been effectively sidelined. And how is that different from what you're doing? Megan asked, speaking up for the first time. You've swooped in and taken over completely. The difference is intent, I replied calmly. Eastern Harvest exists specifically to preserve family farms, not absorb them into a corporate structure. Our model maintains family involvement, respects historical practices where they're sustainable, and focuses on long-term viability rather than quarterly processing quotas. Jason scoffed. Convenient that your company's mission aligns so perfectly with what you want. I founded Eastern Harvest precisely because I saw what was happening to family operations like ours, I countered. I built a company that solves the exact problem Willow Creek is facing. That's not a coincidence. It's the whole point. My father cleared his throat. Heartland's initial offer did look promising, he admitted, but there were concerning clauses in their preliminary documents. Requirements for minimum production levels that seemed potentially unsustainable for our land. Restrictions on selling to any processors other than their facilities. Terms that gave them first right of refusal on any future sale of the property. Jason's expression hardened. Every deal has negotiable terms. We hadn't finalized anything. And in the meantime, the farm continued losing money, I pointed out. The foreclosure clock was ticking. Davis Financial wasn't going to wait indefinitely while you negotiated with Heartland, especially once the foreclosure process had formally begun. Which brings us back to the current reality, my father said, with unexpected firmness. Whatever might have happened with Heartland is now irrelevant. Rebecca has acquired the farm's debt and holds legal title to the property. The question before us is how we move forward from here. Jason wasn't ready to concede. We could challenge the acquisition, claim undue influence, conflict of interest. On what grounds? I asked. I made a fair market offer for a distressed asset. Every step was documented and legally sound. Your family, he insisted. You had inside information about our financial situation. Information that was publicly available in county records and banking disclosures, I corrected. Him. Nothing I accessed required family connections. And again, my relationship to the property was fully disclosed to Davis Financial in writing. A tense silence filled the room. I could see Jason calculating, looking for another angle of attack. But the truth was, he had no legal recourse, and on some level, he knew it. His anger was as much about wounded pride as legitimate grievance. My father broke the impasse. I'd like to hear more about Eastern Harvest's specific plans for Willow Creek. Not generalities, but concrete operational changes, timeline, financial projections. This shift to practical details was exactly what I'd hoped for. I opened my portfolio and removed the comprehensive revitalization plan our team had developed. The plan unfolds in 3 phases, I explained, handing copies to everyone. Phase 1 addresses immediate infrastructure needs and operational inefficiencies. Phase 2 introduces sustainable practices and diversified revenue streams. Phase 3 establishes long-term growth and succession planning. For the next hour, I walked them through the details. The modernized dairy facilities that would reduce labor while increasing output. The water management system that would make us more drought-resistant. The heritage grain program that would create a premium product for specialty markets. The educational agritourism initiatives that would generate off-season income. Throughout my presentation, I carefully used we and our rather than I or my company, emphasizing the continued family involvement in Willow Creek's future. This wasn't a corporate takeover. It was a family rescue mission with professional support. My father asked thoughtful questions about specific aspects of the plan. Megan and Ken seemed increasingly interested in the educational components, which aligned with their backgrounds in teaching. Only Jason remained stonily silent, arms crossed, expression closed. When I finished, my mother spoke up for the first time during the meeting. "It sounds like you've put tremendous thought into this, Rebecca. These changes would preserve what's special about Willow Creek while making it viable for the future." "That's exactly the goal," I confirmed. "Everything in this plan is based on successful implementations we've conducted at similar operations. These aren't theoretical concepts. They're proven approaches adapted specifically for this property and its unique characteristics." "And where do I fit in this grand vision?" Jason finally asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Since you've made it clear you don't think much of my management skills." I met his gaze directly. "That depends on you. The plan includes a position for a field operations manager who would work closely with the new farm director. You know this land intimately, its quirks, its patterns, its history. That knowledge is invaluable and not easily replaced. The position would come with a salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and performance incentives tied to farm profitability. So I'd report to some corporate manager you import from Pittsburgh," he said flatly. "Taking orders on land I've worked my entire life." "You'd collaborate with an experienced agricultural professional," I corrected. "Someone with specialized training in sustainable farming practices and modern operational methods. The relationship would be cooperative, not hierarchical." He gave a humorless laugh. "Right, until the first disagreement about how things should be done. Which is why clear roles and responsibilities would be established from the outset," I acknowledged. "Change is difficult, Jason. I understand that. But the alternative is losing the farm entirely. Is your pride worth that price?" The question hung in the air between us. Before he could answer, his wife Allison entered from the kitchen where she'd been keeping the children occupied. "Lunch is ready," she announced, her voice artificially bright, clearly trying to break the tension. "The kids are getting hungry." The meeting dispersed into the informal chaos of a family meal. I watched as everyone settled into familiar patterns. My mother directing traffic in the kitchen, my father taking his usual seat at the head of the table, Megan helping her children with their plates. Only Jason remained out of sync, standing at the window staring out at the fields instead of joining the family. Chris touched my arm gently. "Give him time," he murmured. "It's a lot to process." I nodded, though privately I wondered if any amount of time would be enough for Jason to accept the new reality. His identity was so thoroughly intertwined with being the farmer, the heir to the family legacy, that my intervention, however necessary, represented a profound loss of self. Lunch progressed with strained small talk and careful avoidance of the morning's discussion. When the meal ended, Jason abruptly announced he was heading to check on the Westfield drainage issue and would be back later. Allison's expression suggested this was news to her, but she said nothing as he grabbed his coat and left. While the others cleared the table, I slipped outside, needing a moment of fresh air and solitude. The November chill bit through my sweater as I walked toward the old oak tree, where my grandfather had built a simple wooden bench decades ago. From this vantage point, most of the eastern fields were visible, rolling away toward the distant tree line. I'd spent countless hours on this bench as a child, watching the seasons change across the landscape, listening to my grandfather explain crop rotations and soil management, asking endless questions about why things were done a certain way. It was here that I'd first understood that farming was as much science and business as physical labor. A realization that had eventually led me to pursue an agriculture business degree and ultimately found Eastern Harvest. "Mind some company?" My father's voice startled me from my thoughts. He stood a few paces away, bundled in his worn work coat, hands thrust deep in his pockets against the cold. I shifted over on the bench. "Of course not." He settled beside me with a tired sigh. For a while, we simply sat in silence, looking out over the land together. "Your grandfather used to bring you out here," he finally said. "I'd see you two, sitting for hours, heads bent together, deep in conversation." "He was teaching me to read the land," I replied, smiling at the memory. How to tell from a distance whether soil was healthy, which fields would need attention in the spring, where water gathered after heavy rains. "He saw something in you from the beginning," my father mused. "A natural understanding of the relationship between business and agriculture. He told me once that you had the perfect combination: respect for farming traditions and the vision to evolve them." The praise from my grandfather, relayed years later, warmed me despite the November chill. "I wish Jason could see what you're trying to do," he continued after another silence. "That this isn't about control or proving yourself right. It's about preserving something precious." "Will he ever see it that way?" I asked. My father sighed again. "I don't know. Jason's like my father in some ways. Stubborn, proud, certain of his own judgment. But he lacks my father's adaptability, his willingness to learn and change when necessary." He looked at me directly. "That quality skipped a generation and landed squarely with you." The unexpected validation brought a lump to my throat. All my life, I'd sought my father's approval, his recognition that my ideas and abilities had value. Now, amid the most difficult family situation imaginable, he was finally offering it. "I should have supported you more," he admitted. 3 years ago, when you presented those modernization proposals, I knew you were right. The farm was already struggling, already falling behind more progressive operations. But supporting you meant challenging Jason, and I took the easier path." "We can't change the past," I said softly, echoing what I'd told my mother earlier. "But we can shape the future, together, if Jason's willing." "And if he's not?" The question held all the weight of a father's worry for his children, his hope that family bonds could survive this fundamental shift in dynamics. "Then we proceed with those who are willing to be part of the solution," I replied honestly. "The farm needs to survive, Dad, not just as land and buildings, but as a viable, sustainable operation that can support the family for generations to come. That's the true legacy worth preserving." He nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would agree with you. He was never sentimental about methods or approaches, only about results, about building something that would last." A figure appeared at the edge of the yard, Jason, returning from his walk, heading toward the barn rather than the house. His shoulders were hunched against more than just the cold. "I should talk to him," my father said, rising from the bench. "Try to help him see what's at stake." "Good luck," I offered, genuinely hoping he might succeed where I had failed. As my father walked away, I remained on the bench, watching the late afternoon light shifting across the fields. The land itself seemed eternal, unchanging, yet I knew that was an illusion. Every season, every crop, every management decision altered it subtly. Adaptation wasn't betrayal of tradition, it was the only way to honor it meaningfully. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from Marcus checking in on how the family meetings were going. I replied briefly, promising a full update when I returned to Pittsburgh on Sunday. Eastern Harvest's daily operations continued regardless of my personal family drama, with 3 other rehabilitation projects in active phases and 2 more in negotiation. The distant sound of raised voices drew my attention to the barn, where my father and Jason were clearly having a heated discussion. I couldn't make out the words, but the body language told a clear story. Jason gesturing emphatically, my father's posture defensive, then resigned. It ended with Jason stalking toward his truck, ignoring my father's outstretched hand. The truck's engine roared to life, gravel spraying as Jason pulled away much too fast down the long driveway. My father stood watching until the vehicle disappeared from view, then turned slowly toward the house, shoulders slumped in defeat. I rose from the bench, brushing off my slacks, and walked to meet him. "That didn't go well," I observed quietly. He shook his head. "He's not ready to listen. Says he needs time to think, to explore options." A heavy sigh escaped him. He mentioned talking to a lawyer about challenging the acquisition. "He won't find legal grounds," I assured him. "But I understand why. He needs to try." My father looked at me with tired eyes. "Do you? Understand, I mean? This farm has been his whole identity since he was old enough to drive a tractor. Now he feels like it's been taken from him, regardless of the circumstances or necessity." "I do understand," I said gently. "But I also understand that his attachment to a specific way of doing things, his resistance to necessary change, was destroying what he claims to love. Sometimes protecting something requires fundamental transformation, not just preservation." We walked together toward the house, the chill deepening as afternoon faded toward evening. Inside, warmth and the aroma of my mother's cooking created a momentary illusion of normalcy, though the underlying tensions remained. Dinner was a subdued affair without Jason and Allison, who had texted they wouldn't be returning that evening. Conversation stayed carefully neutral. Megan's children's school activities, Chris's recent fishing trip, a neighbor's new horse. No one mentioned the farm's future or the morning's revelations. After helping with dishes, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, needing space to process the day's events. The room remained largely unchanged from my teenage years, academic trophies lining the bookshelf, agricultural textbooks stacked on the desk, a faded 4-H ribbon pinned to the bulletin board. A life preserved in amber. Chris found me there, sitting cross-legged on the bed, reviewing Eastern Harvest's operational timeline for Willow Creek. He settled beside me, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. "Productive day?" he asked, no judgment in his tone. "Mixed," I admitted. Dad and Mom seemed to be coming around to understanding why this was necessary. Megan's still on the fence, but asking more practical questions than emotional ones. Jason. I sighed. Jason's exactly as resistant as I expected. "Give him time," Chris suggested, gently closing my laptop. "This is day one of a process that will take months, maybe years, to fully resolve." "We don't have years," I pointed out. "The operational transition needs to begin in January to take advantage of the pre-planting season for implementing the new field management protocols." He smiled slightly. "And this is why you're so good at what you do, and also why your brother finds you so threatening. You can shift from family daughter to CEO mode in an instant." "Is that a criticism?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "An observation," he corrected. "And actually, an admiration. You can separate the emotional components from the practical necessities when required. That's a valuable skill in this situation." I leaned against him, grateful for his understanding. "I just wish everyone could see that I'm trying to save something precious, not destroy it." "They will," he assured me. "When the farm starts thriving again. When they see the results of proper management and investment. Actions will prove what words can't convey." Before I could respond, my phone rang, Marcus's number flashing on the screen. Unusual for him to call directly on a holiday weekend, unless something urgent had come up. "I should take this," I said apologetically. Chris nodded, squeezing my hand before leaving to give me privacy. "Marcus, what's up?" I answered. "Rebecca, sorry to bother you during family time, but we have a situation with the Willow Creek acquisition." His voice had the tight, controlled quality I recognized from previous crisis management scenarios. Alarm raised the hair on my neck. "What kind of situation?" "Davis Financial just called. They've received a competing offer for the farm's debt. Someone's trying to outbid us. Last minute." My mind raced. "That's not possible. We already closed. The paperwork was finalized on Wednesday." "The final transfers hadn't processed because of the holiday weekend," Marcus explained. "Everything's in order on our end. But technically, Davis could still entertain another offer until the funds fully clear on Monday. "Who's making the offer?" I demanded, though I already suspected the answer. "Heartland Agricultural Cooperative," he confirmed. "Apparently, they've been in discussions with the property owners previously and are claiming our acquisition constitutes interference with a pending business relationship." Jason. He'd moved faster than I'd anticipated, leveraging his earlier conversations with Heartland to create an 11th-hour complication. "The timing is suspicious," I noted, trying to remain calm and analytical. "Heartland was supposedly in discussions for months but only makes a formal offer immediately after our acquisition becomes known?" "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "It feels reactive, possibly even coordinated with someone from the family." "My brother," I said flatly. "He mentioned Heartland this morning, claimed they were close to making an offer before I stepped in." Marcus was silent for a moment, considering. "This complicates things. If there's an appearance of family conflict over the sale, it could create public relations issues, regardless of the legal standing of our acquisition." "What are Davis Financial saying?" "Their legal team is reviewing both offers. Technically, ours was first and already accepted, but Heartland is claiming special circumstances based on their prior relationship with the property owners. They're also offering a premium over our price, about 15% higher." My jaw tightened. Jason wasn't just challenging my acquisition. He was actively working to place the farm in corporate hands rather than accept my involvement. He'd rather sell to strangers than allow his sister to save the family legacy. "We need to lock this down immediately," I decided. "Call Davis back and remind them that we have a signed purchase agreement. Offer to wire the full amount tonight, rather than waiting for Monday processing if that will resolve any uncertainty on their part." "Already suggested that," Marcus replied. "Their banking department is closed for the holiday weekend. No one available to process an emergency transfer." I paced the small bedroom, mind whirring through options. "What's our legal standing if they try to renege?" "Strong, but not ironclad. We'd have a solid case for specific performance-based on the signed agreement, but litigation would be costly and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the farm would remain in limbo." This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. My brother actively working to undermine a solution that would save the family farm, simply because he couldn't accept that I was the one providing it. "I need to address this directly," I said after a moment of thought. "Call our attorney and have them draft a formal letter to Davis Financial, emphasizing the binding nature of our agreement and the potential legal consequences of entertaining competing offers after accepting ours. Email it to me for signature within the hour." "Will do. And Rebecca?" Marcus's voice softened slightly. "Try not to let this derail your family reconciliation efforts. Business is business, but family is forever." The platitude, though well-intentioned, struck a nerve. "Tell that to my brother, who's apparently willing to sell our legacy to a corporate conglomerate rather than accept my help." After ending the call, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process this new development. The complexity of emotions was overwhelming. Anger at Jason's underhanded tactics, hurt that he'd go to such lengths to thwart me, concern for what this meant for the farm's future, and beneath it all, a deep sadness that family relationships had deteriorated to this point. A soft knock at the door preceded my mother's concerned face. "Everything all right? You look upset?" I considered glossing over the situation, protecting her from yet another family conflict. But transparency had been lacking in this family for too long. "Not really," I admitted. "Jason has apparently contacted Heartland Agricultural Cooperative. They're making a competing offer for the farm's debt, trying to undermine my acquisition." Her face paled. "He wouldn't do that, not without discussing it with the family first. The same way he discussed taking out the second mortgage against the East Fields, or the equipment loans he defaulted on." The sharpness in my voice surprised even me. I took a deep breath, moderating my tone. Mom, Jason has been making unilateral decisions about the farm for years. Why would this be any different? She sank onto the bed beside me, looking suddenly every one of her 68 years. When did we become this family? When did we stop talking to each other, trusting each other? The question held genuine pain and confusion. For all her enabling of Jason's dominance over family decisions, my mother had always believed she was holding things together, maintaining peace. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I do know we can't continue this way. The farm deserves better. Our family deserves better. She nodded slowly. What will you do now? About Jason and this Heartland situation? Address it directly, I said, determination replacing my initial distress. First legally to secure the acquisition, then personally with Jason. It's time for honest conversations, even uncomfortable ones. He won't make it easy, she warned. I don't expect easy, I replied. I expect necessary. As night settled over Willow Creek Farm, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the moonlit fields. Somewhere out there, my brother was plotting his next move, still refusing to accept that things had changed irrevocably. The little sister he'd dismissed for years had become the only person who could save what he claimed to love most. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more difficult conversations. But tonight, under the same stars that had watched over generations of millers, working this land, I renewed my commitment. This farm would survive and thrive again. Not as a museum piece preserving outdated methods, not as a corporate cog in Heartland's industrial agriculture machine, but as a modern, sustainable family operation honoring the past while embracing the future. The path forward had never been more complex, but neither had my resolve to see it through. Morning arrived with a thin dusting of snow across Willow Creek Farm, the first of the season. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming my hands, watching the world transform under winter's first tentative touch. There was something poetic about it, a clean white slate covering the complications beneath. Last night had been a flurry of phone calls and emails with Marcus and our legal team, securing our position with Davis Financial and countering Heartland's 11th-hour maneuvers. By midnight, we'd received confirmation that our acquisition would proceed as planned, despite Jason's attempts to derail it. The bank's legal department had ultimately determined that our signed agreement took precedence over Heartland's belated interest. Victory should have felt sweeter. Instead, it left a hollow ache in my chest. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to unfold. Family pitted against family, legal threats replacing conversation, my brother so desperate to avoid my involvement that he'd court a corporate takeover instead. "You're up early," my father's voice broke through my thoughts. He shuffled to the coffee pot in his worn plaid robe, a weekend ritual unchanged since my childhood. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too much on my mind." He nodded, understanding without needing details. "Jason called last night. Very late." My stomach tightened. What did he say? That Heartland had made an offer for the farm's debt. That you'd blocked it somehow. He poured his coffee and joined me at the window. "Is that true?" "Partially," I replied carefully. Heartland did make a last-minute competing offer after learning of our acquisition. But they had no standing. We already had a signed agreement with Davis Financial. All I did was insist that the bank honor their legal commitment to us. My father was quiet for a moment, watching the snow continue to fall in delicate flakes. Why would Jason do that? Go behind our backs to Heartland after we'd already discussed your acquisition? Because he can't accept me as the solution, I said simply. His pride won't allow it. He'd rather see the farm in corporate hands than under my management. The pain in this truth hung between us. My father sighed deeply, the weight of family discord heavy on his shoulders. "He's coming by this morning," he finally said. Says he has a proposal of his own. Asked that the whole family be present. This was unexpected. I'd anticipated continued resistance from Jason, perhaps even legal challenges, but not a counter-proposal. What could he possibly offer that would change the fundamental reality of the farm's situation? Did he give any hint what he's planning? My father shook his head. Just said it was important, that it might be a way forward for everyone. He looked at me directly, concern etching deeper lines around his eyes. Whatever happens, Rebecca, remember that you've already saved this farm. No matter what Jason says or does today, that truth doesn't change. His words warmed me more than the coffee ever could. After years of feeling sidelined and dismissed, my father's recognition meant everything. Thank you, Dad, I said softly. That means a lot coming from you. We stood in companionable silence, watching the snow transform the familiar landscape into something magical and new. It felt like a metaphor for what I hoped to accomplish with the farm, preserving what was precious while allowing necessary change to create something even more beautiful. By 9 o'clock, the family had gathered in the living room again. My mother sat nervously on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Megan and her husband Ken occupied the love seat, their expressions guarded. Chris stood by the fireplace, offering me silent support with his presence. My father had taken his usual armchair, looking more prepared than anxious. The doorbell rang precisely at 9. My mother startled slightly, unusual for Jason to ring rather than simply walking in. She hurried to answer, voices murmuring in the entryway before she returned with not just Jason, but a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive-looking overcoat. Everyone, this is Richard Hayward, Jason announced without preamble. Executive Vice President of Agricultural Acquisitions for Heartland Cooperative. The introduction sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Jason had brought Heartland's representative directly into our family meeting, a bold move that immediately changed the dynamic. Richard Hayward smiled smoothly, removing his coat to reveal an impeccably tailored suit that screamed corporate success. Thank you for allowing me to join this discussion. I know this is a private family matter, but given the circumstances, Jason thought my presence might be helpful. My professional instincts kicked in immediately. Heartland sending an executive vice president on a Saturday morning to a family farm in rural Pennsylvania signaled how seriously they were taking this acquisition opportunity. They clearly wanted Willow Creek badly enough to pull out all the stops. Mr. Hayward, I acknowledged, stepping forward with my hand extended. I'm Rebecca Miller, CEO of Eastern Harvest Capital. His eyebrows rose slightly at my title, whether in surprise at my position or recognition of a potential competitor, I couldn't tell. Ms. Miller, your reputation precedes you. Eastern Harvest has made quite a splash in agricultural preservation. Circles. We prefer agricultural revitalization, I corrected politely. Preservation implies maintaining things exactly as they are, which is rarely viable in today's market conditions. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the familiar dance of corporate pleasantries masking tactical assessment. We were sizing each other up, two professionals recognizing a worthy opponent. Perhaps we should all sit down, my father suggested, breaking the momentary tension. Jason, you mentioned having a proposal? Jason nodded, waiting for Richard Hayward to take a seat before speaking. I've been talking with Heartland extensively over the past 24 hours. They've put together an offer that I think represents the best path forward for the farm and our family. He glanced at Hayward, who smoothly opened his leather portfolio. Heartland is prepared to acquire not just the outstanding debt on Willow Creek Farm, but the property itself, for a premium price of $2 million, the executive explained. This represents approximately 20% above current market valuation, reflecting our high interest in this particular property. I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise at the figure. It was significantly higher than the farm's actual value in its current condition, a strategic overpayment designed to sway the family. Under our proposed arrangement, Hayward continued, the Miller family would retain lifetime residence rights to the farmhouse and surrounding 5 acres. Jason would be hired as Regional Operations Manager for Heartland's Pennsylvania Division, overseeing Willow Creek and adjacent properties we're developing. The Miller name would remain associated with the farm for branding and historical purposes. He turned several glossy pages in his portfolio, revealing architectural renderings of a modernized Willow Creek, new barns, updated equipment, expanded dairy facilities. Our investment in the property would exceed $5 million over the next 3 years, transforming it into a flagship operation for our organic dairy initiative. The presentation was slick, professional, and clearly designed to dazzle a struggling farm family with promises of prosperity and continued relevance. I glanced around the room, gauging reactions. My mother looked uncertainly between Jason and my father. Megan and Ken were studying the renderings with evident interest. My father's expression remained carefully neutral. This sounds like a significant commitment from Heartland, I observed when Hayward finished. May I ask what production requirements would be attached to this arrangement? Minimum output expectations, processing commitments, exclusivity clauses? Hayward's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Standard operational parameters would apply, of course. As with any agricultural business, targets need to be established for financial viability. And those targets would be... I pressed. Jason interjected before Hayward could respond. The specific numbers are still being negotiated, but they're reasonable and achievable with the improved infrastructure Heartland would provide. Without firm production commitments, it's impossible to evaluate whether those targets are actually sustainable for this specific property, I pointed out, especially since the renderings show a significant increase in herd size compared to current operations. Have you conducted soil capacity studies, water resource assessments, or impact analyses for such expansion? Hayward's professional demeanor never faltered, but I caught the flash of annoyance in his eyes. Our agricultural science team has reviewed the property records extensively. We're confident the land can support our production goals with proper management and investment. I see, I said coolly. And the exclusivity arrangements? Would Willow Creek be permitted to sell milk or other products to processors besides Heartland facilities? As the property owner, Heartland would naturally direct production to our own processing facilities, he replied smoothly. It's the efficiency of vertical integration that makes our business model successful. I nodded. And what happens if those production targets aren't met? If weather conditions, disease outbreaks, or other agricultural realities interfere with the standard operational parameters you mentioned? The question hung in the air, momentarily disrupting Hayward's polished presentation. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our contracts include reasonable accommodation for agricultural variables, Hayward finally responded. But sustained underperformance would naturally require reassessment of management approaches. Meaning Jason's position as regional operations manager would be contingent on meeting corporate production quotas, regardless of whether those quotas are actually sustainable for this specific property, I translated. Rebecca, Jason cut in sharply, you're deliberately focusing on hypothetical negatives instead of the tremendous opportunity Heartland is offering. $3. $2 million for a failing farm plus guaranteed employment and residence rights is an extraordinary deal. It's certainly a generous purchase offer, I acknowledged. But it fundamentally changes what Willow Creek is, from a family-owned operation to a corporate production facility. Once sold, that change is permanent and irreversible. As opposed to your solution, Jason countered, where you own everything, and we all work for you? Eastern Harvest doesn't work that way, I replied evenly. Our model maintains family ownership through a structured redemption program. Once the farm returns to profitability, The family begins repurchasing ownership shares until full control is restored, typically within 7 to 10 years, depending on performance. This detail seemed to catch everyone's attention. Even Jason paused. Momentarily. "You never mentioned that part before," my father said. "Because we hadn't gotten that far in discussing the operational plan," I explained. "But yes, Eastern Harvest's mission isn't permanent ownership. It's rehabilitation and return to family control. We provide the capital, expertise, and management, systems needed to make failing farms viable again, then transition ownership back to the families while maintaining support relationships." Richard Hayward's expression had cooled considerably. This information positioned Eastern Harvest in stark contrast to Heartland's permanent acquisition model. "Such arrangements sound appealing in theory," he said dismissively. "But agricultural operations require consistency and long-term planning. Changing ownership structures creates instability." "Not if the transition is properly structured and phased," I countered. Eastern Harvest has successfully implemented this model at 11 properties across 3 states. The redemption program actually creates stronger incentives for family participation and investment in long-term sustainability. My father leaned forward, interest sharpening his gaze. "How exactly would this redemption program work for Willow Creek?" I outlined the specifics. How operational profits would be divided between reinvestment, Eastern Harvest's return on investment, and a dedicated fund for family share repurchases. How management responsibilities would gradually shift back to family members who completed our agricultural business training program. How the redemption timeline could be accelerated based on performance metrics. As I spoke, I could see Richard Hayward growing increasingly uncomfortable. His glossy corporate presentation was being overshadowed by a more family-friendly alternative that preserved long-term independence. "These redemption programs sound nice on paper," Jason interjected when I finished, "but let's be realistic. The farm would need to generate substantial profits to meet all those obligations, enough for operations, Eastern Harvest's investment return, and share repurchases. That's not realistic for a property this size." "Actually, it is," I said, opening my own portfolio to reveal the financial projections. Our operational plan for Willow Creek shows break-even by month 14, positive cash flow by month 18, and sufficient profitability for redemption initiation by year 3. These projections are conservative and based on actual results from similar properties. I passed copies of the financial models to everyone, including Richard Hayward. "You'll note that unlike Heartland's approach, our plan doesn't rely on dramatically increasing herd size or production intensity. Instead, it focuses on operational efficiencies, premium product development, and diversified revenue streams that are less vulnerable to market fluctuations." The room fell silent as everyone reviewed the detailed projections. Even Jason seemed momentarily stymied by the thoroughness of the analysis. Richard Hayward recovered first, closing his portfolio with a decisive snap. "While Eastern Harvest's approach certainly has its merits for some properties, Heartland believes our offer represents superior immediate value for the Miller family. $3, $2 million in hand provides certainty that speculative profit projections cannot. Immediate cash versus long-term independence," I summarized. "That's the fundamental choice here." My father looked up from the financial projections, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Hayward, could we have a copy of Heartland's proposed contract? The complete document, not just the presentation highlights." "Of course," Hayward replied smoothly. "I can have that sent over by Monday morning." "And the production requirements, exclusivity clauses, and performance metrics would all be specified in that contract," my father pressed, a momentary hesitation. "The standard operational parameters would be included, yes?" My father nodded slowly. "I appreciate Heartland's interest in our farm. Your offer is generous and warrants serious consideration. We'll need to review all the documentation carefully, of course." It was a diplomatic response that committed to nothing while acknowledging the legitimacy of Heartland's approach. My Father had always been skilled at maintaining cordial business relationships, even in difficult circumstances. Completely understandable, Hayward agreed, standing and gathering his materials. Family farms represent not just business, but heritage. Such decisions shouldn't be rushed. He handed my father his business card. Please call me directly with any questions about our proposal. We're prepared to move quickly once you're ready to proceed. The subtext was clear. Their offer was time-sensitive. Create urgency, prompt quick decisions, limit time for detailed analysis. Standard corporate acquisition tactics. Jason showed Hayward to the door while the rest of us remained, in awkward silence. When he returned, the conciliatory demeanor he'd maintained during Hayward's presentation vanished. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? He snapped at me. Had to undermine everything with your questions and competing offers. I asked legitimate questions about details that weren't included in Hayward's glossy presentation, I replied, calmly. The same questions any responsible farm owner should ask before selling to a corporate entity. Heartland is offering us a lifeline, Jason insisted. A way to preserve the farm and our connection to it without being under your thumb. Under a corporate thumb instead, I corrected. With production quotas, exclusivity requirements, and standard operational parameters that will transform this property into an industrial dairy factory, regardless of what's actually sustainable for the land. You don't know that. I know exactly how agricultural conglomerates operate, Jason. It's literally my business to know. I turned to address the whole family. Heartland isn't evil. They're just corporate. Their primary obligation is to their shareholders, not to this land or this family. Their decisions will always prioritize quarterly production targets over long-term sustainability or family legacy. My mother spoke up for the first time since Hayward's arrival. The money they're offering, it would solve so many problems. It would, I acknowledged. Financial problems, absolutely. But it would create others: permanent loss of control, corporate production pressures, irreversible transformation of what this farm has always been. As opposed to your way, where you control everything, Jason said bitterly. Temporarily, I emphasized, with a clear path to returning full ownership to the family. That's the fundamental difference between Eastern Harvest and Heartland. We're a bridge to family independence. They're a permanent corporate acquisition. My father cleared his throat. I think we need time to process both options, to review the complete documentation from Heartland when it arrives and compare it thoroughly with Rebecca's proposal. He looked at Jason directly. No rash decisions, no end runs around family discussions. We do this together, openly and honestly. Jason looked like he wanted to object, but finally nodded reluctantly. Fine, but we need to decide quickly. Heartland won't wait forever. Creating artificial urgency is a classic high-pressure sales tactic, I pointed out. If their offer is genuinely good for this farm and this family, it will withstand thorough scrutiny and thoughtful consideration. My brother glared at me but said nothing more. The family meeting dispersed awkwardly, with Jason departing immediately, while the rest of us tried to maintain some semblance of normal Saturday activities. I retreated to my father's study, needing quiet to process what had just happened. Jason, bringing Heartland's executive directly into a family meeting was a bold move, one that signaled how determined he was to prevent my involvement in the farm's future. Chris found me there, staring out the window at the snow-dusted fields. That was intense, he observed, closing the door behind him. Jason's pulling out all the stops, I agreed. I didn't expect him to bring Heartland physically into our living room. It was a good tactical move, Chris acknowledged. Made their offer feel more concrete, more immediate than your financial projections and management plans. He wasn't wrong. For a family facing financial ruin, Heartland's promise of immediate millions would be powerfully tempting compared to Eastern Harvest's longer-term approach. Do you think they'll take it? Chris asked after a moment. Heartland's offer? I considered the question carefully. Dad won't. He sees through the glossy presentation to the loss of independence beneath. Mom's tempted by the financial security, but she'll ultimately defer to Dad. Megan and Ken don't get a direct vote, but they seemed impressed by the numbers. And Jason? Jason will push for it regardless of the details, I said with certainty. Anything to avoid accepting my solution. Chris settled into my father's desk chair, watching me thoughtfully. Is there a compromise position? Some middle ground between Eastern Harvest's full acquisition and Heartland's corporate takeover? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on implementing Eastern Harvest's standard rehabilitation model that I hadn't considered customizing our approach specifically for this unique family situation. Maybe, I said slowly, ideas beginning to form. If we structured something different, something that addressed Jason's pride issues while still providing the necessary expertise and capital. Chris smiled, recognizing my shifting mental gears. And there's the problem solver I know and love, always finding the third option when everyone else sees only two. I crossed to my father's desk, borrowing a legal pad to sketch out a new approach. For the next hour, I drafted alternative structures that might preserve Eastern Harvest's core rehabilitation methodology while creating a role for Jason that acknowledged his connection to the land. By lunchtime, I'd developed a framework that felt promising, one that separated operational management from land stewardship, creating parallel authority structures with distinct responsibilities. Eastern Harvest would control the business operations and financial decisions during the rehabilitation phase, while a newly created Land Stewardship Committee led by Jason would oversee long-term conservation, sustainability practices, and heritage preservation. The arrangement wasn't perfect. It would create additional complexity and potential friction points. But it might satisfy Jason's need for meaningful involvement, while still allowing Eastern Harvest to implement the necessary business transformations. I was explaining the concept to Chris when a knock at the study door interrupted us. My father entered, looking tired but determined. Rebecca, could we talk privately for a moment? Chris nodded and squeezed my hand before leaving us alone. My father settled heavily into his chair, the weight of the morning's confrontation evident in his posture. I just got off the phone with Ben Walker at First Regional, he said without preamble. Asked him some direct questions about Heartland's approach with other farms they've acquired in the region. My interest sharpened immediately. Ben Walker was an old-school banker who'd worked with farm families for decades. If anyone would give my father the unvarnished truth about Heartland's practices, it would be him. What did he say? My father's expression was grim. That their contracts are filled with production quotas that start reasonable but escalate rapidly after the first 2 years. That they've replaced local management at 3 properties when targets weren't met, despite promises. About maintaining family involvement. That their premium purchase prices are offset by below-market rates paid for milk and crops delivered to their processing facilities. None of this surprised me. It was standard corporate practice dressed up in family-friendly language. Exactly what I'd suspected lurked behind Hayward's glossy presentation. Did you tell Jason? I asked. Tried to. He accused me of being manipulated by you. Said Ben Walker doesn't understand modern agricultural economics. My father shook his head in frustration. He's so determined to avoid your involvement that he can't see the forest for the trees. The assessment was painfully accurate. Jason's pride had become a liability not just to himself, but to the entire family and the farm's future. I've been thinking about a potential compromise, I said, showing him my notes on the parallel authority structure. Something that might give Jason meaningful involvement while still allowing Eastern Harvest to implement the necessary changes. My father studied the proposal carefully, asking thoughtful questions about how the divided responsibilities would work in practice. After thorough discussion, he sat back with a contemplative expression. "It's a generous accommodation," he acknowledged. "More than many would offer given his behavior. But will it be enough to satisfy him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I have to try. This isn't just about business for me, Dad. It's about family." His eyes warmed with understanding. "I know that, Rebecca. I've always known that." He hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry I didn't support you more firmly years ago when you first tried to help. Pride seems to be a Miller family failing. Mine, as much as Jason's." The apology, so long overdue, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that." He reached across the desk to cover my hand with his weathered one. "Whatever happens with Jason, with Heartland, with all of this, know that your mother and I are deeply proud of the woman you've become. The business you've built. The way you're fighting for this land when it would have been easier to let it go." His words filled a space in my heart that had been empty for years, the space where a father's approval should live. I'd built Eastern Harvest partly to prove myself to my family, to show them my ideas and abilities had value. Now, finally, that recognition had come, regardless of how the current situation resolved. "That means everything to me," I said softly. We shared a moment of connection that transcended the immediate crisis, father and daughter finding common ground in our love for the land and what it represented. The moment was broken by raised voices from the kitchen. Jason had returned and was apparently in heated discussion with my mother. My father sighed, rising from his chair with visible reluctance. "I should intervene before that escalates," he said. "Think about what you'd be willing to offer Jason in this compromise arrangement. What's negotiable and what isn't. We'll need clarity when we present it to him." I nodded, already mentally refining the framework. "I'll have something concrete by dinner time." As my father left to mediate the latest family conflict, I turned back to my notes, determined to find a path forward that preserved both the farm and the family that had tended it for generations. The snow continued falling outside, covering the fields in pristine white, a blank canvas waiting for the future we would collectively create. The question remained whether Jason could overcome his pride enough to be part of that future, or whether his resistance would ultimately force a more difficult solution. Only time would tell, and the clock was ticking with Heartland circling like wolves around a wounded prey. I squared my shoulders and continued working. I hadn't built Eastern Harvest by backing down from challenges, and I wouldn't start now, especially not when the stakes included not just a farm, but my family's heritage and future. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight reflecting off the snow with diamond brilliance. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with preparations for the family meeting and strategies to counter Heartland's misleading press release. The farmhouse felt eerily quiet without Jason's presence. His heavy footsteps, his whistling, his constant rearranging of my mother's kitchen items. His absence cast a shadow over the familiar space. I was reviewing my presentation when my father appeared, looking as if he'd slept as poorly as I had. He nodded silent greeting before pouring coffee and settling across from me. "Eastern Harvest's clarification statement went out last night," I told him, showing him the message our PR team had crafted. It simply stated that Eastern Harvest Capital held legal title to Willow Creek Farm, that discussions with Heartland were preliminary, and that no agreements had been finalized. Professional, non-inflammatory. Accurate without accusation, he approved. "There's no benefit in escalating the public aspect of this situation," I replied. "Our focus needs to be on family resolution, not corporate posturing." "When did my youngest child become the most level-headed member of this family?" he asked with a weary smile. "I had good teachers," I said simply. "You and Grandpa both emphasized keeping business separate from emotion." "Easier said than done when the business is also your home, your heritage, your daily life." He gazed out at the snow-covered fields. "Jason called last night, after you went upstairs. What did he say? Tried to justify his actions, said he was accelerating the inevitable because the family was being manipulated by Eastern Harvest's slick corporate promises. The bitterness in my father's tone made clear what he thought of these explanations. When I pressed him about making statements on behalf of the entire family without consent, he claimed it was his right as farm manager to secure the best possible future for Willow Creek. Will he be at the meeting? I asked. My father nodded. With Richard Hayward to ensure Heartland's offer receives fair consideration. That's fine, I decided. I've invited Marcus to join virtually. If Heartland will have a voice in the room, Eastern Harvest should too. By 9 o'clock, the living room had been transformed into an impromptu boardroom. My laptop was set up with Marcus attending via video call, his professional presence reassuring even through a screen. Megan and Ken had arrived minutes earlier, settling beside my parents on the sofa. The doorbell rang precisely at 9. My mother returned with Jason and Richard Hayward. My brother's face was a mask of defiance tinged with discomfort. He knew he'd crossed a line but remained committed to his course. Hayward exuded corporate confidence in his tailored suit and carefully neutral expression. Chris squeezed my hand, in silent support as the newcomers took their seats. The stage was set for what would likely be the most consequential family meeting in Willow Creek Farm's history. My father cleared his throat, assuming the role of moderator. We're here to discuss the future of Willow Creek Farm. Recent developments have created confusion about the farm's status and the family's intentions. Today's goal is to clarify our path forward through open and honest discussion. Jason shifted impatiently. Let's not dance around the issue. There are two concrete options. Heartland's offer to purchase the farm outright for $2 million with continued family involvement, or Eastern Harvest's temporary control with vague promises about future family ownership. We need to decide which provides the most secure future. Actually, I replied calmly, I'd like to present a third option, one that integrates elements of both approaches while prioritizing what matters most, keeping Willow Creek as a viable, family-connected operation. For generations to come, I opened my presentation on both my laptop and the tablet I'd provided to my parents. This revised proposal creates a genuine partnership between Eastern Harvest and the Miller family, particularly drawing on Jason's deep knowledge of this specific property. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the integrated approach I developed, one that maintained Eastern Harvest's financial backing and management expertise while creating meaningful roles for family members. The proposal included a clear timeline for returning majority ownership to the family through a structured redemption program with transparent benchmarks and financial projections. Most significantly, I'd crafted a special role for Jason that acknowledged his connection to the land while integrating his traditional knowledge with modern agricultural science. The position, Land Heritage Director, would make him responsible for ensuring that modernization efforts respected the property's historical patterns and unique ecological features. This approach isn't about replacing traditional farming methods wholesale, I explained, addressing Jason directly. It's about identifying which traditions remain valuable and sustainable, which need modification, and which should evolve into new approaches. Your expertise in how this specific land responds to different management practices would be invaluable. Throughout my presentation, Jason remained stone-faced, but I caught flickers of interest when I discussed specific aspects of field management that would incorporate his knowledge. Richard Hayward grew increasingly tense as the comprehensive nature of Eastern Harvest's proposal became clear. When I finished, my father turned to Jason. Questions? Concerns? Several, he replied, though with less immediate hostility than I'd expected. The redemption program sounds appealing in theory, but the benchmarks seem ambitious. What if the farm doesn't achieve the projected performance metrics? It was a legitimate question rather than a dismissal, the first positive sign. The timeline is adjustable, I assured him. If external factors like weather events or market disruptions affect performance, the redemption schedule would be modified. The goal is family reacquisition, not adherence to rigid timetables. And my role, this land heritage director position, it sounds ceremonial. Would I have actual authority over operational decisions? Not unilateral authority, I acknowledged. Honestly. Eastern Harvest specialists would have final say during the rehabilitation phase. But your input would be required for all major decisions, and any recommendation you made that wasn't implemented would need written justification. It's a collaborative model, with checks and balances. Richard Hayward chose this moment to interject, clearly sensing the potential shift in Jason's stance. While Eastern Harvest's proposal is thoughtfully developed, I must emphasize the immediate financial certainty Heartland offers. $2 million within 30 days versus years of waiting for theoretical redemption payments. He turned to my parents, his expression professionally concerned. At your stage of life, wouldn't immediate financial resolution be preferable to years of continued involvement in a struggling operation? My father wasn't easily manipulated. At my stage of life, he replied with pointed emphasis. I'm more concerned with legacy than immediate gratification. What happens to this land long after the money is spent matters more than how quickly we receive it. My mother nodded agreement. This farm isn't just property to be sold to the highest bidder. It's where we raised our children, where Tom's father taught him to read the seasons, where generations of millers have weathered good years and bad. That history deserves consideration alongside financial calculations. The conversation continued for another hour, exploring specific aspects of both offers: production requirements, employment guarantees, residents' rights, decision-making authorities. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Jason becoming increasingly engaged with the details of Eastern Harvest's proposal, asking substantive questions rather than simply dismissing it. Eventually, my father called for a family-only discussion. After Hayward and Marcus disconnected, an expectant silence fell over the room. The moment of decision had arrived. Before anyone speaks, my father said quietly, I want to acknowledge that every person here loves Willow Creek Farm and wants what's best for its future. We may disagree on what that looks like, but the underlying motivation comes from a place of genuine care. With that said, he continued, I believe we need to address Jason's actions regarding the Heartland press release before discussing the proposals. Making public statements on behalf of the entire family without consent has damaged trust that needs to be repaired. Jason's jaw tightened. I did what I thought necessary when Rebecca was manipulating everyone with elaborate presentations and corporate doublespeak. That's not fair, Megan interjected, surprising me with her defense. Rebecca has been transparent from the beginning. You're the one who brought in Heartland without family discussion and authorized a misleading press release claiming family agreement that didn't exist. Jason looked taken aback by criticism from Megan, who had traditionally been his ally. I was trying to create options beyond just accepting Rebecca's takeover. By taking unilateral action yourself? My father asked pointedly. How is that different from what you're accusing Rebecca of doing? At least her acquisition saved the farm from foreclosure. I decided to extend an olive branch. Jason, I understand why you felt backed into a corner. My acquisition moved quickly, and change is always threatening when it affects something you care about deeply. But I genuinely believe Eastern Harvest's approach offers the best chance for Willow Creek to remain a Miller family farm for generations. A pained look crossed his face, but it would be completely transformed. Everything Grandpa built, everything I've managed, modernized until it's unrecognizable. There it was, the heart of his resistance. Not just pride or control, but fear that the farm's essential character, its connection to our grandfather, would be lost. Jason, I said gently, what made Grandpa exceptional wasn't that he never changed his methods. It was that he adapted thoughtfully as circumstances required. Remember how he transitioned from draft horses to tractors? How he modified crop rotations when soil science evolved? How he implemented conservation practices before they were common? My father nodded. Your grandfather was progressive for his era, Jason. He embraced necessary change while maintaining core principles about land stewardship. That balance is exactly what Rebecca's proposal seeks to achieve. Jason fell silent, absorbing this perspective that challenged his idealized view of our grandfather's approach. After a long moment, he looked directly at me. If, and this is a big if, we went with Eastern Harvest's plan, would my role have actual substance? Real input that would be taken seriously? Absolutely, I assured him. Your knowledge of this property, its drainage patterns, soil variations, microclimate peculiarities, is invaluable information that no outside expert could replicate. Eastern Harvest scientists would provide modern methodology, but your understanding of this land's particular characteristics would inform how those methods are implemented. He considered this, then asked a question that surprised me with its vulnerability. And what if I can't adapt? What if I can't learn the new systems fast enough? The question revealed the deeper insecurity beneath his resistance. Fear of inadequacy in a transformed operation. That's why the partnership model is gradual, I explained. No one expects overnight transformation. Eastern Harvest provides training, mentorship, and phased implementation specifically designed to bring traditional farmers into modern methodologies at a manageable pace. My mother reached across to touch his hand. Jason, you've carried the weight of this farm's struggles alone for too long. It's okay to accept help, especially when that help preserves what matters most, the land's connection to our family. For the first time, I saw Jason's defensive posture truly softening. The combination of family unity, recognition of his concerns, and a path forward that valued his knowledge had finally begun to penetrate his resistance. I need some assurances, he said after a long silence. Written guarantees about my role, residence rights, the redemption timelines. Of course, I agreed immediately. All of that would be formally documented in Eastern Harvest's partnership agreement. He nodded slowly. And Heartland's offer, my father answered, provides immediate financial benefit but permanent loss of family ownership. Once sold, this land would never be ours again, regardless of what titles they offer you. The stark reality of that permanence seemed to resonate with Jason. He looked around the room, at the stone fireplace where our grandfather had told stories, the worn wooden floors that had supported 4 generations of millers, the windows framing views of fields our family had tended for nearly a century. I need to think, he said finally, rising from his chair. Alone. Without either Rebecca or Hayward shaping the narrative. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a significant shift from his previous rigid opposition. As he left the room, the remaining family members exchanged cautiously hopeful glances. After about an hour, I noticed Jason walking toward Outlook Point, the small rise where our grandfather had built a bench decades ago. Without conscious decision, I found myself following his path, compelled by something beyond strategic calculation. This moment felt pivotal. A brother and sister who loved the same land but envisioned its future differently, needing to find common ground. I settled beside him without speaking, allowing silence to create space. The view before us was spectacular, pristine. Snow blanketing the rolling fields, red barns clustered near the white farmhouse, thin wood smoke rising against a flawless blue sky. Grandpa used to bring me up here too, Jason finally said, his voice quiet. After you'd gone to college, he'd talk about crop rotations, soil management, weather patterns, practical things. But sometimes he'd just sit quietly, like we're doing now, and then say something like, "This view is why we do the hard work. To keep this for the ones who come after us. The shared memory created a bridge between us. Different experiences with the same beloved grandfather, the same essential lessons about stewardship and legacy. That's still what matters, I replied softly. Keeping this for those who come after us. Everything else, management approaches, financial structures, operational methods, those are just means to that fundamental end. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. I've been thinking about what Dad said, about Grandpa being progressive, for his time, embracing necessary change while maintaining core principles. I've held on to an idealized version of him as a traditional farmer, but that's not really accurate. He was constantly adapting, wasn't he? He was, I confirmed. Remember how excited he got about that new soil testing methodology in his 70s? Or the computer program for tracking livestock genetics that most farmers his age wouldn't touch? He valued innovation that served the land's long-term health. A ghost of a smile touched Jason's face. I've been so focused on preserving his methods that I lost sight of his principles, the why behind the what. It was a profound insight, one that suggested Jason might be ready to separate essential values from specific practices, creating space for necessary evolution. Eastern Harvest's approach is built on that exact distinction, I told him, preserving core principles about land stewardship, family connection, and sustainable agriculture while adapting methodologies to current realities. I still have concerns, he finally said, about my role, about the pace of change, about whether this new version of Willow Creek will still feel like home. Those are legitimate concerns, I acknowledged. Any significant transition creates uncertainty. But would you be willing to work with me on addressing them, on finding solutions that honor your connection to this land while ensuring its viability? He turned to look at me directly, his expression a complex mixture of resignation, hope, and cautious openness. I think I would, not because I'm fully convinced, but because the alternative is losing this place entirely. And because despite everything, I trust that you love this land too, in your own way. It wasn't an enthusiastic endorsement, but it was an opening, a willingness to collaborate rather than oppose, to find common ground in our shared love for Willow Creek Farm. 6 months later, I returned for the formal implementation of Eastern Harvest's rehabilitation plan. The spring planting had been completed under the new collaborative structure, with Jason working alongside our agricultural specialists to integrate traditional knowledge with modern methodologies. The transformation was already visible. New water conservation systems in the eastern fields, updated equipment in the dairy facilities, solar panels on the barn roofs. But the farm's essential character remained intact, its connection to Miller family history preserved even as its practices evolved. Most importantly, the family itself was healing. My mother had organized a celebratory dinner, setting the table with her best china and grandmother's silver. There were still occasional tensions, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge, but the underlying commitment to collaboration had held firm. As we gathered, I noticed something significant. The kids' table had been dismantled. Instead, an extension had been added to the main dining table, creating space for everyone to sit together as equals. My place setting was positioned between my father and Jason, a symbolic acknowledgement of my role in bridging traditional management with new approaches. Looks like I've been promoted from the children's table, I observed lightly as we settled into our seats. Jason caught my eye with the ghost of a smile. Figured the CEO of our partner organization probably deserves a spot with the adults. My father raised his glass, looking around at the assembled family with pride. To Willow Creek Farm, past, present, and future. And to the Miller family, who found the courage to change in order to preserve what matters most. As glasses clinked in agreement, I gazed out at the fields stretching toward the horizon. Fields that would remain in our family for generations to come, not despite change, but because of our collective willingness to evolve while honoring the legacy that had brought us to this moment. Sometimes, I reflected, the journey from the kids' table to equal partnership requires more than simply growing older. It demands proving your value, standing firm in your truth, and ultimately finding ways to integrate different perspectives into a stronger whole. Just like the farm itself, family relationships require both roots and growth, honoring tradition, while embracing necessary change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.